Hello everyone and welcome to another Endgame episode with Coach B from MasterChess.com. In this video, we're going to go over the positions that involve opposite colored bishops where the stronger side has two connected passed pawns that are on the 5th rank or behind. To fully understand this lesson, I encourage you to watch my first video in this playlist where we're looking at the two connected passed pawns being on the 6th rank. With the pawns on the 5th rank or behind, the defending side can only draw if it reaches the correct defense setup. The setup involves placing the king in front of the pawns and the bishop in a place where it will attack one of the pawns and at the same time prevent the advance of the other pawn. The less advanced the pawns are, the more chances for the defending side to reach the desired setup. And I do want to mention that these rules do not apply if the connected pawns are on a knight and a rook file. For this position, we've seen even with the pawns on the 6th rank that black can easily achieve a draw if the bishop can get on the diagonal in front of the pawns. So first, let's take a look at the position where white can win this game and see why the same type of play does not work when the correct defense setup is in place. So in this first position, we can see that the defending side has the king in front of the pawns. However, his bishop is not on the correct diagonal where it can attack one of the pawns, preventing the other one from moving. So here, with white to play, white is totally winning. Part of the winning plan will involve pushing the pawn to e6. But in order to do that, white will need to use the bishop to cover the dark squares. And here, he can attack the king either on c4 or on g5. The correct move here is moving the bishop to g5. The reason for that is that when we will push the pawn to e6, the white bishop will cover both squares in front of the pawns. Both f6 and f7 will be covered. And as a general rule, you never want to leave the defending king get in between the pawns. Coming back, attacking the king from b4 will be a terrible mistake. So let's go ahead and see why. After bishop to b4 check, the black king can move to f7. And now if the king moves to d4, black can play bishop to c2. And now there's only two ways that white can play here. If it pushes the pawn to e6 check, after king to f6 getting in between the pawns, black achieved the draw. After pawn to e7 and king to f7, there's nothing that white can do to prevent black from drawing this game. After something like king to e5 and bishop to a4, white cannot make any progress. The black king will stay as a rock on f7. He cannot be challenged by the bishop. He cannot be challenged by the white king. Pawn on f5 cannot make a move. And all he needs to do is keep the bishop on the a4 to e8 diagonal. As soon as the pawn reaches e8, the dark square bishop will simply capture it, and white cannot make any progress. Coming back after king to d4 and bishop to c2, we looked at pawn to e6 check. If white responds here with pawn to f6, well, after king to e6, black has reached the draw. The black king cannot be forced to move from e6. The white bishop cannot challenge him. The white king cannot push him away. The pawn on e5 is blocked. And as soon as the pawn moves to f7, the black king can simply capture it. All black needs to do now is shift his bishop from c2 to the square g6 and keep it on the h5 to e8 diagonal. So black has reached the draw. Coming back from the very beginning, the correct move is bishop to g5 check, where the bishop will cover both of the squares in front of the pawn when the pawn will move to e6. And now, black has only two options, moving the king to f7 or moving the king to d7. If he moves the king to f7, white will respond with king to d8. And now, black has two options, either bishop to a2 or bishop to c2. If he moves the bishop to c2, attacking the pawn on f5, here, after pawn to e6 checked and king to e8, the pawn will march to f6, reaching the desired winning technique with the pawns on the 6th rank. And I'm just going to fast forward to the correct continuation to see how white will win this game. And here, white won the game. Coming back, we looked at bishop to c2. A better response is keeping the bishop on the same diagonal with bishop to a2. But even here, white is winning. White will respond with king to c5, after bishop to b3, king to d6, bishop to a2, and now the white king will support the pawn moving to e6. So after pawn to e6, Black cannot capture the pawn as white can capture back, so the king will simply retreat to e8. And after this, white will move the pawn to f6, reaching both connected pawns on the 6th rank with the winning endgame, as we've seen in the previous video. And I'm just going to fast forward to the winning continuation, and white wins the game. Coming back, after bishop to g5, we looked at the king moving to f7. If the black king moves to d7 instead, white is also winning. After this, white will respond with king to f4. After bishop to a2, bishop to h4, making room for the king to come to f6 to support the pawn push to e6. After bishop to f7, king to g5, king to e7, king to h6 check, king to d7, king to g7, bishop to d5, and now king to f6. After bishop to b3, the pawn is ready to march to e6 with check, king to e8, king to e5, king to f8, pawn to f6, and white is again winning with the same technique as we've seen before. So next, let's take a look at the position where black was able to reach the correct defense setup. So here we can see that the defending king is in front of the pawns, and his bishop is also attacking the pawns, preventing the push on e6, as the bishop can simply capture that pawn, and after black captures back, a draw is achieved. So in this position, if white tries to play the same way, attacking the king with bishop to g5, where he covers both squares in front of the pawns, this is not going to work here. After king to f7, white cannot make any progress. Here, the white king needs to reach the square d6 to support the push on e6. However, if the white king marches towards that square, the black bishop can simply capture the pawn on f5, reaching a draw. Coming back, if the white king tries to go on the other side instead, let's say king to f4, the bishop will simply stay on the same diagonal with bishop to d7, and white cannot make any progress. He can try king to g4, bishop to c8. Bishop to h4, making room for the king, bishop to d7. King to g5, bishop to c8. And there's nothing that white can do here to make progress. The only tries he has is moving the pawn to e6 check or moving the pawn to f6. If he moves the pawn to e6 check, black can simply capture the pawn on e6, and after e takes e6 and king captures back, a draw is achieved. Coming back, the only other option that white has is pushing the pawn to f6, and now all black needs to do to keep a draw is simply keep the bishop on the c8 to h3 diagonal. So he can move the bishop to e6, and white cannot make any progress. Next, we're going to take a look at a position where the connected pawns are on the 4th rank. However, because of the poor position where the pieces are placed, black will have a little bit of difficulty reaching the desired setup. So in this position, it's black to move, and we know that the correct defense setup would be where the king is in front of the pawns, which he already achieved that, and the bishop will also need to be in front of the pawns, attacking the pawn on e4 and also preventing the other pawn from marching. However, with the bishop on f1, this will actually be very difficult to achieve. Therefore, black needs to think about the setup when the pawns will be on the 5th rank. In other words, eventually when the pawns will push to the 5th rank, this is the desired setup that he's looking for. From here, he's going to be able to attack the pawn on d5 and also prevent the pawn on the e file from marching forward. So coming back from the very beginning, knowing that the bishop needs to be on the g8 to d5 diagonal, the correct move is bishop to c4. Coming back, if black makes the mistake of moving the bishop to b5 instead, trying to reach the other setup, this will fail, because after bishop to b4 check, let's say king to d7, the pawn will march to d5, and here white is winning. After something like bishop to c4, king to d4, bishop to e2, pawn to e5. Now the pawns have reached the 5th rank, and black is going to have difficulty reaching the desired setup with the pawns on the 5th rank. After bishop to g4, king to e4, bishop to h3, king to f4, king to d8, pawn to e6, bishop to g2, pawn to d6, the pawns have reached the 6th rank with the winning endgame. So coming back from the very beginning, the correct move is bishop to c4, going for the desired setup with the pawns on the 5th rank. After something like bishop to g3, king to c6, very important. Moving the king to d7 would be a mistake because white can respond with pawn to d5. and he can actually push for a win now. But coming back after king to c6, black is able to hold on. After king to f4, bishop to f7, king to e5, king to d7, pawn to d5, bishop to g6, king to d4, bishop to h7, pawn to e5, and bishop to g8, where black has reached the correct defense setup, and he's able to draw this game. Alright, thank you so much for watching this video. I encourage you to visit my website, masterchess.com, where you will be able to practice this lesson against the computer. All you have to do is click on Endgame versus Computer, opposite color bishops, and then you can play against the computer. Alright, thank you and have a great day.